Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hi, Becky. Thanks for coming.
Now in 20 minutes, your office will be nice.
Yes, he's at a conference. That's right. Very sad. So, sad things. Should Ryan be in it? Ryan. Can you get in our picture and make sad face?
All right.
Sad face? Make sad face. We're gonna sad face with me. Chris, keep on the sad face. We're long enough to respond to yours. Ryan's gonna do it.
Or you can do it.
Oh my Lord.
I'm so smart.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, it was not brighter, but I was trying to like make a joke.
Oh no, is it a weather world?
Yeah. It was not a good last shadow that we saw. He said it was like one.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was maybe arguable.
But it did get clear here, not clear. There was blue sky right in the
Oh, yeah.
I said that's what you're gonna walk through.
Okay. I took it as like Vietnamese. I could tell.
You did what I told you, yes, and I'm yelling at you. Typical woman. I gotta put like camera back there. Hold on, man.
I think we're good to go. Alrighty, hi everybody. Thanks for coming up. Last briefing before break. We only have 2 left after this. Hard to believe how fast the fall has gone by. Dan DePodwin is here from AccuWeather. Graduated from this department in 2011. And thanks for coming, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. I've done this many times now, it seems like, and every time I know less and less people here because now it's been 4.5 years, I guess. So it's amazing how much time flies. So as Ryan said, my name is Dan DePodwin. I'm a meteorologist at AccuWeather. I did operational forecasting for about 3 years or so at AccuWeather, and now have moved into more of a research and development role with the company. So I don't necessarily do this every day anymore, but I'm still sort of in touch. So hopefully I can provide a bit of insight here this morning. It's actually a really fascinating weather pattern. I've got a couple of different parts of this map discussion, starting with probably at least some of you are aware of the satellite, the newest generation of Japanese satellite that was launched, I think, last year, and is providing data. You can access this data visually on the RAM-B Sierra site from Colorado State. It's pretty awesome to see. This is nighttime across the West Pacific, so this is all high-res nighttime imagery, and you can see the sun setting on the western part of the frame and then rising on the eastern bottom right at the last couple of frames. You'll see the sun start to rise there. We have a tropical system out near Guam that's headed westward and looks to strengthen into a typhoon if it isn't already. But this is just a sort of a appetizer for what's to come with GOES-R when it gets launched, hopefully towards the end of next year, and that will be the new satellite over the east, probably the eastern part of the United States, or the eastern part of the entire northern and southern hemisphere in that window. So the amount of high-resolution data will just explode really over the next couple of years with this new satellite imagery, and it'll be really interesting to see how weather forecasting, especially in severe weather, changes with the fact that we'll have in some situations, minute data at a very high resolution, 2 or less kilometers. And that data will be available basically the moment it's transmitted from the satellite. So instead of waiting 15 minutes for your data, you'll be getting it basically right away. And it'll be interesting to see how that combined with radar helps us improve our severe weather forecasting. So I just thought this is a great image. It's really cool to see where the technology and the science is going here in the next couple of years. I've got a couple of non-connected random thoughts that I'll start with, and then I'll get into the current weather. Obviously, there was a snowstorm in Denver. This is my attempt at isoplething 4 years after college. This is the CocoRa's data. Denver's here in the middle. This is from the storm a couple days ago. You see, obviously, higher amounts in the mountains, and it was really dependent on where you were in Denver. Amounts dropped off pretty quickly off to the north, especially the north and west. This area here where the over 9-inch amounts were is the Palmer Divide, and they really got some of the best snow from this storm, but it dropped off pretty fast. You went from 10 inches here down to 7, and some places only got 3 or 4 off to the east of Denver. I think the airport picked up around 4 inches of snow, which was it's the snowiest November since November 2011. You have to go back to, and that storm in November 2011 was on the 1st and 2nd of the month. That was a pretty early storm for out there, but obviously you can get snow in October out in Denver as well. So a bit of a snowy November for Denver. And they've had a couple of storms in the region. And then this is just a better version than my terrible attempt at isoplething a map. And you can see the Palmer Divide again south of Denver with the higher accumulations. And here's a great MODIS imagery from, this is really cool because you can see the Palmer Divide here and where the snow fell. And then obviously no snow off to the north. I don't think Cheyenne got any either. Obviously snow in the mountains, but this is just a great image. I think this is yesterday's image. So, and on the flip side, on the warm side of the storm, this was taken from U.S. Tornadoes, which is a really great blog about weather. They showed here the climatological or the history of tornadoes in November. All of these colorful markings are where tornadoes have occurred in November. But if you look, these triangles here are the tornadoes that occurred with this system a couple days ago. So it's very unusual to see tornadoes where they occurred this far west. Very unusual system. Just thought it was an interesting graphic to show how anomalous this storm was. And this is a cool image from last night. Just thought it was neat to show the front coming through off and moving off to the east. You can still see it on satellite actually up here on the map wall right now. It's a really sharp boundary on the back side of the front. And again, as I said, these are very disconnected thoughts. I apologize, but stuff that sort of caught my eye last night when I was putting this together. On the left here is the Enzo forecast from January, earlier this year in January. And you can see that this was back in December December 2014, and this was the model projection of what Enzo would be as we headed into and through much of 2015. And you can see that the majority of the models, except for this one, which I think is the CFS, had a moderate, had a bit of a positive signal, but nothing very strong. But by April of this past year, the models were showing a significant El Nino event. So it's interesting that the models didn't really catch on initially, but the CFS was pretty consistent, showing the fact that a strong El Nino would develop out in the Pacific, which obviously has been what has happened. So those are just several thoughts. Oh, and this is let me show this too. This is the current forecast for what is expected to happen in the future here, peaking of an El Nino here this winter and then falling off towards neutral as we headed into the middle part of next year. So, having talked a bit about what's happened previously and what may happen very briefly in the long range, we'll move to what's happening here currently. And there's definitely a lot of exciting things happening in the weather. It's November after all, and this is one of the more exciting months of weather here as we head into the winter. And with an El Nino, it could be a very exciting winter for a lot of the nation with a very strong southern jet. So we'll start away from the U.S. and sort of move closer to home as we head through the rest of this presentation. So again, we have a tropical system out in the western Pacific, which has been quite a year for the Pacific and tropical systems. Joint Typhoon Warning Center has this typhoon. I guess it's a typhoon now, yeah. Typhoon Infa, moving off to the west and then recurving and basically staying away from land and going south of Guam. Always good to keep in mind what's happening in the rest of the world. There's some really awesome stuff that happens and some pretty terrible weather that occurs in the Western Pacific a lot of the time. Closer to home, here's our current surface analysis from 15Z today, so just a little earlier. We have an occluded front stretching basically across the region here, a cold front back to the west, and a 970 millibar low up by Hudson, or up over Hudson Bay, and a lot of wind behind it, as we've seen the past couple of days with wind gusts upwards of 80 miles an hour in some spots across the northern plains. It's definitely November here, and you can see that we have a low trying to develop here across the Carolinas and sort of maybe enhance some of the rain down there. I thought it was interesting just so if we note the two fronts here, the occluded front and the cold front on the surface analysis, here's the zoomed in, a little cluttered I guess, might be a little tough to read, but you can see that we're very cloudy here, obviously, drizzly, pretty cruddy in central Pennsylvania here early this afternoon. Temperatures in the upper 50s, 60s showing up near Williamsport. As you head further west, right behind the occluded front, you can see the wind is really kicked up here, gusting to 20 miles an hour or so or higher across the Pittsburgh region, western PA. You can see the wind shift as well behind the front. And if you look further west, it's a little less defined, but you can see where the cold front is too. It's in the 40s across Illinois, but it's in the mid to upper 50s in parts of southern Ohio. And you can see a bit of a wind shift from more of a southwest direction here to more of a westerly direction across Indiana and Illinois, and that matches up well with where the front is moving through. So the real cold air is still back across the Midwest, and that will get here as we head later in the weekend by Sunday. And this cold air will set up a nice snow event for much of the Midwest here over the next couple of days as we head into the weekend. We'll move to satellite imagery, and this is a great loop from Wisconsin. They have a very nice satellite loop, and they have a lot of great satellite products from SSEC up at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. They do a great job up there. Obviously, the very sharply delineated front moving off to the east and about to push off the east coast. You can see the cold front too, with a couple of clouds here moving towards the Ohio River as we head into the early afternoon hours, and lots of moisture still streaming onto the west coast. Not as nasty as it was a couple days ago, that they had a lot of power outages up in the Washington State area, and pretty quiet elsewhere. You can see, though, a good feed of tropical moisture here with a tropical system off the coast of Mexico and really feeding this front here. So it's always interesting to see the connection from the moisture here from the Pacific all the way up into James Bay and Hudson Bay area of Canada. And this matches up well with what we'd expect on the radar. A lot of rain along the East Coast. The rain sort of fizzled out as it got here last night. It rained a bit, but I guess it didn't really. I'm not sure what the total was here. How much, Bill? 2,200. So pretty basically a non-event here with rain. It's been, although pretty cruddy all day. And plenty of heavy rain across the south. There were a couple tornadoes yesterday. I'm not sure if there were any reported, but there were definitely some warnings on some really nasty-looking sort of line segments across the Georgia region yesterday. And again, you can see some showers across the Pacific Northwest. Aside from that, we're pretty quiet and obviously very windy across the northern plains. As you'd expect behind the front, we're 20 to 30 degrees colder across much of the upper Midwest than we were this time yesterday. And we're warmer in the east. In fact, 10 to 15 degrees warmer in a lot of places too. I was looking at this map earlier this morning. I noticed that there's not as much of a departure up across the St. Lawrence Valley as you head towards Quebec City, and I thought that was interesting. So I pulled up the surface analysis here, or I guess just the surface obs from up at the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and you can see that here in New York we've got temperatures in the 60s. It's 66 in Syracuse, 67 in Rochester, 50s as you head further north, 64 as you head close to the New York and Canada border, but you don't have the good southerly flow that you have further south off to the north here, where it's still in the 30s and low 40s. So the chillier air hasn't scoured all the way out here, having gotten that good southward, the northward push of air as you head further north. So looking at the forecast, well, before that, I'll just show briefly here to show that a bit better. You can see the temperature contrast across the northern part of the U.S. here. This is from a site, this is in Celsius, let's put it in Fahrenheit. This is from a site called NetAtmo. They're a European company that has created personal weather stations. I actually bought one a couple of months ago. They're fairly accurate, it seems like, and all the reports, if you choose, are populated onto a map on a website, and they're also ingested by the company. And it's a really great way to see some microclimates. They have a lot of coverage, especially in Europe. So if you're interested in looking at temperatures across Europe, it's a really great site to do that. They have world coverage. Zoom out here. You can, I guess people in Greenland have bought these weather stations too. See how cold it is up there. It's very cold in Alaska this morning, 17 below, and it's very nice in Hawaii. But they have global coverage, which is great. So if you're interested in a global view of the world and temperatures, they also have a couple of, they've also started producing rain gauges and anemometers. So they have some data for wind and rain. But I like to use it for temperatures and just seeing what it's like around the area, especially microclimates will become more interesting here as we head into the winter.
So are you at 59 on?
I don't know if I'm the 59 on here. There's a few people in State College that have one. I don't want you to know where I live, so because it's sort of scarily accurate with how precise it pinpoints your location with a little pin here. There's I think 4 or 5 in State College. It doesn't seem to want to load right now.
And is this site free for anybody?
Yeah, it's free. Yep, it's free for anyone to use. You can have an account. You don't have to have an account. Clearly, on a day like today, you'd expect uniformity across the region. It's 59 everywhere, which is to be expected, which shows that the instruments are probably pretty well calibrated because it's all the same. It's free to use. They're like, if you want to buy them, they're I think $150. So yeah, they're neat. And you can access it all via your phone, so you don't have to be home to see what your weather station's doing. You can get it on an app on your phone.
Question, does
Yeah.
it transmit through Wi-Fi? Is that
Yeah. Yes, Wi-Fi. I think you set it up using Bluetooth or something like that too, and it transmits via Wi-Fi. I think they have 10,000 stations. That might only be in Europe. They have a lot of different locations. Moving into the forecast as we move towards the second half of this discussion here, I've got the GFS and the European model pulled up. The GFS, obviously the 12Z run, the European, the 0Z from last night. And I'll run through the GFS. They're fairly similar with the overall pattern, even over the next week, which is good. There was a lot of model disagreement earlier this week. We've sort of seemed to come into alignment over the last couple of days. High pressure building into the Mississippi River Valley this afternoon and evening with the front moving off to the east. And you've got this pretty chilly air mass dropping in as we head into tomorrow into the plains. 1040 millibar high drops through the Canadian Rockies here tomorrow, and low pressure gets going across western Kansas and eastern Colorado and starts to spread an area of snow through northern Nebraska and into parts of Wyoming. And this will be our next system to watch, especially for the Chicago region up through Wisconsin, Michigan, and into southern Canada for their first major snow of the season heading into Saturday. The GFS shows this system as a pretty flat wave initially, but with a bit of an injection of cold air. It should be a pretty decent overrunning surface for some snow across Iowa Friday and into Friday night. And then this low really deepens and moves off to the northeast and heads just south of Chicago Friday night into Saturday morning, and spreads snow off through Michigan by Saturday, and wraps up and really sort of intensifies Saturday night into Sunday before it occludes and moves off into parts of Canada. The European, for comparison here, shows a very similar pattern with low developing across western Kansas. It has been over the past couple of days a bit deeper, stronger with the area of low pressure. The GFS has sort of caught on to that trend. Looks like the European is not as wound up as it was yesterday at this time. It also might be a slightly further east, although pretty good comparison between the two models. And again, shows a similar idea of heading off to the north and east. we see how this reflects on the 500 millibar height maps here. And as you'd expect, a very pretty potent system here. As of 1 a.m. tomorrow morning, expected to be across eastern Washington. That shortwave digs pretty deep trough here and heads through Kansas, and then it'll eject off to the north and east. But you can see it really deepens as it heads into the trough. So a pretty strong system, although it's early in the year, and it heads off to the north and east. And it does cut off on the GFS, it does not on the Euro. That's a bit opposite of what's been shown the past couple of days. That would probably signify a more intense system. I think the key question here, it looks like a pretty good swath of 4 to 8 inches of snow. Some places probably pick up more than that in some key areas. The big question, I think, is Chicago and whether downtown Chicago can pick up accumulating snow and how much they can because of the lakes this time of year. So I wanted to quickly dive into just a Chicago forecast. I think it's a pretty interesting setup here. You got the low going off to their south, not too far to their south, but enough south where you should be on the cold side of the storm, so you have some of the cold air. You've got the really moist lake. This time of year, you have a lot of cold air over the lake, so you can maybe produce some more instability and potentially enhance the snowfall in the Chicago region. But the issue is going to be the boundary layer, because the temperatures of the lake are currently close to 50 degrees. So with any prolonged stretch of wind across the lake, you're talking about trying to transport near 50-degree air. So that's going to modify the air mass a bit, at least along the lake area. If you get a north wind further inland, that will help the snow prospects. But right along the coast, we might be talking about a mixed situation. That's sort of shown on the SREFs here. Pull up the 9Z. Here's the precipitation type probabilities. And you can see that the highest chance of snow, this is 12Z Saturday, so Saturday morning, highest chance of snow would be across the Madison area and northwestern Illinois. Pretty good chance of rain, though, showing up right along the coast, which is to be expected here. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out as we head into the weekend. And if you look at the probabilities of over an inch of snow on the top left panel here, again, this is 12Z. This is ending at 18Z Saturday. Most of the probabilities of more than an inch or more than 4 inches of snow are off to the northwest of Chicago. So I think, I haven't looked at this really in depth, but my first thought is that I think a forecast of a fair amount of snow in Chicago itself is probably overdone. But there is certainly an opportunity there if the wind can get enough off the land instead of off the water, that there's a chance for a pretty significant early season snowstorm there. And you probably won't have to go too far to the west to get into some 4 to 6 inch amounts. To show that a bit further in detail, pulled a couple soundings from Chicago. A little small, I apologize for that. So the left on all these is the European, the right is the GFS, and we started at 0Z Saturday, so Friday evening. You can see that obviously at this point we're not precipitating, it's cloudy. The boundary layer is not saturated yet. You've got this is interesting, you've got a west wind on the European and an east wind on the GFS. Pretty consistent though with the west wind aloft ahead of the system. And a ripping west wind at 50 knots or even up to 100 as you head up, pretty good jet at this point. And for those who can't see here, this is the 0 degrees Celsius line, so we're almost at 5C here on Friday evening, so well above freezing. By 6C, we've saturated on the European. The GFS is still a bit, probably not precipitating yet. At least the GFS is a little slower with the precip getting in there. A southeast wind at the surface. Temperatures have dropped, as you would expect on the European, a bit more than the GFS because we've precipitated, so we've wet bulbed. And by Saturday morning, boundary layer on the European is maybe +1, +2 Celsius. The GFS still not as fully saturated down the column. And you've got a east wind or a southeast wind, again, that's off the lake. So, especially the east wind on the European. That would probably say that it's trying, it's a maybe a rain snow mix. Most of the layer is below freezing. But if your boundary layer, especially in a city, is near freezing or above, you're probably not going to be accumulating very quickly, especially as you head into the daylight hours. It'll be interesting to see if it can snow a bit at night and stick a bit, and see if it depends when it starts snowing, I think, as well. By 18Z, both models show that it's probably snowing, although, again, you have a couple, the GFS shows 2 or 3 degrees above Celsius. The wind now is turned off to the northeast, or the northwest on the GFS, and then by 0Z Sunday, the event is basically ending, and the wind is out of the northwest. So it'll be an interesting call in Chicago. I lean towards a lower amount in the city itself, but ramping up with several inches as you head further west and north. And lastly, since we're here in State College and unfortunately have no snow yet, we'll talk briefly about the forecast locally here and whether we may see any flakes this weekend. So this system, as it heads off to the northeast, brings a cold front through the State College area as we head into Saturday night. Obviously, it will be pretty not mild, but mild enough for no snow ahead of it. All the good precipitation's on the backside of the system with the as it moves off to the north. And on Saturday evening here, the front works its way through a pretty dry front, and given the fact that we'd be downsloping with the west wind and northwest wind, the chances of anything here that's is not too high. Could we see some snowflakes? Sure. I don't think anything accumulates. Not really a good setup. It looks like there could be, that there probably is snow in the higher ground across the Bradford region here off to the north on Sunday morning before this high pressure noses in and we get rid of the cyclonic flow by Sunday afternoon. And at that point, this stuff shuts off. Maybe there's some flurries left. But for here, some snowflakes probably, but nothing too exciting yet. That's sort of different than the past couple of Novembers here. I think we've had accumulating snow towards the end of the month the past 2 years at least. We've had several inches. This year looks like we'll go the entire month without any snow here in State College. And just to show that on some soundings, here is the the GFS. This is just the GFS from, this should say 0 and 6Z. I apologize for that. This is the 0Z Sunday and 6Z Sunday soundings. You can see it's pretty bone dry. A little more moist here by 6Z on overnight Saturday night, but boundary layer is still pretty warm. So any snow here probably comes after 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, and would probably just be only some snow showers and nothing of note. And I think I'll end it there and open up for any questions. Yeah.
I was working the weather service evening shift last night. What was interesting, above 900 millibars, pretty warm at 850. The warmest air, even warmer in Florida, was over Buffalo, Pittsburgh.
Oh, interesting.
Plus 14, plus 15.
That's interesting. Let me go back to there we go. So this is the initialization. Oh, I pulled the GFS up apparently. I thought I pulled there we go. Let me go back to last night. Here's the initialization of the European at 850. That's a great point. You can see the plus 10 isotherm here all the way up, well up into Canada. That's a great point.
That satellite loop you're pointing out was really remarkable, seeing that high amplitude.
Absolutely. It's quite the ridge here across the eastern part of the eastern part of the country. Any other questions or comments?
Could you just run the European forward, Dan, to Thanksgiving Day? Just take a quick peek.
Yep. So here's Wednesday, the busiest travel day of the year. High pressure across the east. And hopefully you're not traveling across Montana. Don't drive. Probably not very good across Montana. Looks like, that looks, at least on the European, it looks pretty nasty. The GFS, the 12Z run, similar idea where you have a high, very strong high building southward, but you don't have the low in the same spot. So the idea is that a trough really digs into the west in the longer range here. So this is Tuesday. This is sort of similar to what just happened, where you have this really deep trough in the west. It looks a little different, but it's a similar type of pattern. And so here's the GFS, bowling ball out west on Wednesday, and the European. So very similar idea with ridging in the east again. So the mild weather continues. It looks pretty nice here next week with temperatures near 50 probably. High off to the northeast, so it's not a true southerly flow. In fact, it could be a bit of an onshore flow here. Thursday on Thanksgiving. So there's Thanksgiving on the European with a good Thanksgiving Day snowstorm across North Dakota and into southern Canada. Yeah.
Two things. A year ago, before Thanksgiving, we got some measurable snow here.
We did.
Other than watching last night, is glad we gained more tropical systems off the southeast.
Yeah, that's a great point too about the tropical systems. It seems like stuff wants to try to almost spin up here as we head towards Thanksgiving. Probably isn't an impact to the coast, but you never know. Maybe some type of hybrid system. And this is the European headed out on Black Friday, so good for your shopping here. And then as far as it goes out on Saturday. GFS decides to show a really big Arctic plunge on Saturday with 498 thicknesses diving into Minnesota. So here's a GFS just for fun. Not that we pay much attention to this, but it's always cool to look. So a cold shot here at the end of the month with a wave off the East Coast. So maybe we do get snow, but you never know. It's always fun to look, but the European has a bit of a different idea, not as strong with a trough. Anything else?
All right, thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. We'll come back and have a very own.
Oh.
Since nobody else signed up. Riveting. For my
Yeah, you have to do your.
kitchen, my sister's mother.
Be a little turkey.
And your wine and your turkey.